Hey Sean, it's so great having you today. How are you?
Not, I can't complain really. It's weird, difficult in some ways, but also I know that other people have it more difficult. And all in all, at least I can still be creative through it. So feeling lucky at least for that.
Yeah,
But the one thing that Glasgow's really got going for it is that it's a city that's sort of used to having to be resilient and looking after itself a bit as well. So I think there's definitely been an increased sort of sense of community. Within like a week of the lockdown or something, like started seeing posters everywhere offering support for people. Creative Scotland were quite good at offering out support. Places like the National Theatre of Scotland were quite fast, at least for an organisation of their size in terms of transferring everything online. So
yeah,
I think as a city, I feel glad to be here.
absolutely. So you've found that you've been able to be creative during lockdown?
Just about. I mean, it was hard at the start. I think the transition was difficult, but I'm feeling more like I'm in the flow now, and I think that's common across the board. I think a lot of people were finding it difficult first, just in terms of like, oh God, how do we do this now? How everything's changed suddenly. How do
Yeah,
we change to suit it?
yeah,
But
yeah.
now everyone's starting to slowly find their feet a wee bit.
Yeah. So do you feel like throughout the course of the lockdown you've built in a routine, or is it just a day by day thing for you?
Pretty day by day. I mean, there's some days when I just do loads. I wake up and there's things I need to be doing. There's poems in my head. There's like performance ideas that I want to sort of develop straight away. And then there's other days when I wake up and I just feel like, oh, this is all a bit much, isn't it? And you have
Yes.
to just sort of watch Netflix for the morning,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Well, I've heard this term, the Corona coaster.
Corona
The
coaster.
Corona coaster. So you go kind of up and down. And I just wonder whether it's the same with creativity. How have you found inspiration?
I'm not sure if you count it as inspiration really, but like it's just sort of adapting to the circumstances. Like I didn't necessarily want to start suddenly making art that was about coronavirus and lockdown,
Yeah.
because let's face it, it's a bit boring. It's like it's really like stressful and this worldwide pandemic and this apocalyptical type situation, but at the same time it's quite boring because everyone's just sort of inside.
Are you finding different ways to approach it?
So for me it was about adapting some of the things I'm already interested in
Yeah.
to then include sort of maybe how those things have changed as the crisis has happened and progressed. So things to do with identity and food, and community and family connections.
Yeah.
That sort of being able to adapt all that as I go is really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the last thing you were working on before lockdown?
So I've been working on a performance to do with fortune cookies,
Nice.
and basically through these fortune cookies I tell various narratives about racism,
Mm.
identity, sort of misidentification, mixed cultural, mixed race issues, and also just like the history of fortune cookies as like an item. And so basically I was just on a stage ripping open all these fortune cookies. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
It really felt like it was going places. I felt like people were connecting with it. I was lucky to be able to take it down to the Just Start Here festival in Dumfries
Great.
with the National Theatre of Scotland, and got some really good feedback from that. But at the same time, because it's a very live experience, it's very much about the sharing of food. It's very much about the sound and the sort of
Mm.
the visuals of me opening the cookies. It's about like as I walk around the stage, gradually the floor becomes more and more messy with all these fortune cookie debris, and like I'm
Yeah.
smashing them all. And so it's quite
Fantastic.
like there's so many things that if I was to try and do it online, it just wouldn't work. want to like do a sort of spiritual adaptation of it, if I can say that, which is like so basically not just sort of doing it, but doing it online, but taking some of the things that I think are interesting about that performance that maybe would work online, and trying to maybe do something with that instead. So maybe just doing like very intimate kind of one-on-one or very small group performances where I will sort of like read fortune cookies just to each of them, and maybe like there'll be some back and forth, you know, quite sort of immersive kind of performative stuff going on.
Yeah.
But like in terms of the actuals, I'm not just going to sort of take the script of what I've done before and just do an online version of it.
Yeah.
But also, you know, that's an opportunity as well. It's one that I hadn't considered before lockdown, and you know, I didn't really want to consider it. And at first, I was a bit like, oh, I don't want to do it online, or just give up a bit. But it's, you know, it's an opportunity to test myself. So whereas now doing stuff online, I'm able to connect with people in Hong Kong, in America, you know, wherever.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a really positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, and there is this question, isn't it, of, you know, you've worked really internationally, and how, you know, can this time in working online, can it mean that we can be a bit more international with our work? Like, do you see that as a possibility?
I mean, I think it's encouraged more people to at least try it, because I think, you know, there were resources before to do this sort of things, but because people weren't forced into giving it a go.
Yeah.
I think people, like as myself included in this, sort of dismissed it a wee bit.
Yeah, sure.
Well, because it isn't the same as live performance, and I do very much miss live performance. I miss live audiences and all that.
So a lot of that work that you've done, as you said, is about food, identity, race. Do you see either those concepts changing at the moment in the wake of COVID-19, or how are you approaching those themes afresh with this new world
I
knowledge
mean,
type?
it's interesting with takeaways because a lot of what I was doing project-wise, research-wise, artistic-wise to do with takeaways was about trying to encourage people to see them not as this representation of poverty or working classness or, you know, illness or sickness or bad health or whatever, but to sort of see it in this more positive way of it's a way for people to be able to connect with each other. And now suddenly that coronavirus is around, suddenly those people are very, very specifically deemed essential workers. And
Yeah.
suddenly, you know, people are who perhaps wouldn't normally be offering takeaway foods, or restaurants, or, you know, even like, you know, pubs perhaps are suddenly, you know, offering up their dishes to be able to take away. And
Yeah.
it's like people are sort of, I think, starting to realize that just because it has been associated in the past with something doesn't mean that it has to keep being like that. But in terms of like the whole racism angle of it, I think that's a bit more, it's a bit harder to see if that's changed or not, because
Yeah.
everyone's so isolated at the moment. But I think, especially from the perspective of Chinese takeaways, it was quite negatively affected at the beginning, especially when it hadn't reached its full severity in the UK.
Yeah.
Just because it was seen at that stage still as this very like Chinese kind of problem. You know, there was an increase in racism towards Chinese people in general. And I know personally that like certain takeaways or restaurants have had to close completely just because people will suddenly stop buying Chinese food.
Yeah.
Which is a real shame, I think. But I
Yeah.
think, like, at least from my limited perspective, from my wee bubble here,
Yeah.
I think that perspective has sort of dampened a bit as people realize the severity of it and realize that it's not this like Chinese thing cooked up in a live food market in Wuhan. It's like actually this global pandemic thing that's going to affect everyone.
I've seen you share food as well at some of your performances. How do you think that will affect not only how we understand sharing food, but also how you might change your performances with social distancing.
I think that's a really interesting one. I think it's different for so many different people, in terms of access. I think in terms of like people being able to share food with loved ones, for instance. Like people used to be able to go over to their family's houses and have like a big roast dinner or something like that,
Yeah.
whereas now they can't. And so that kind of sharing, I would like to hope is that once it is able to begin again, people are going to be more sort of like, wow, reminded of how special this is.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I've seen more and more people baking.
Yes. Yeah, it's
which
fantastic.
is cool.
I've
And like
never
just
heard the word yeast used so often with all my friends. Every time it's like, we have yeast now. It's
yeah,
what? Well,
yeast,
what is this?
sourdough
Why are people
starters.
doing this?
But I mean, I'm guilty of it as well. I've like been baking loads.
Oh, what are you baking?
I baked cakes, I baked bread, I baked some hot dog rolls one day.
What?
I've
Baked hot
made my
dog
own,
rolls?
like pizzas,
That's amazing. The best I can do is banana bread. But again, I'm Aussie, so it's like, right, give me some of that banana bread. I don't know why, it's a really Aussie thing, but
But like I was baking them, and like I've been sharing them out as well. I've been like going over to people's houses and like leaving them on the doorstep and giving them a wee text like, there's food in your doorstep for you or whatever. And so like, that's a kind of sharing that I wouldn't have done before. There is still sharing going on. It's just not the same kind of sharing that we used to do.
and it's different. And I guess, yeah, how does this make you think about like food and the community and sharing that? Because you are right, like so many people have signed up to volunteer to deliver food, to get food to people. And we've had supermarkets where literally like, I couldn't get flour for 2 weeks because of the stress baking that's going on. Everyone's got the flour.
Yeah.
So how?
It's really interesting actually, because as I say, it's that term essential workers that the government's thrown about. And suddenly I think a lot of people are realizing like, oh God, they're like essential, like they're the essential ones. Well, why do we even bother going to offices? Like, if I ever become super rich or anything, is to like have some sort of Zoom performance thing where we all order each other food. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah.
All that, it's all come at a sort of a really pivotal kind of moment, especially concerning stuff like Brexit, where you're thinking about things like the possibility of importing chlorinated chicken, and so all these sort of like all the destruction of health and food safety standards, stuff like that, and also in terms of a lot of vegetable picking in the UK or stuff like that is done by Eastern European migrants, and so it's become really ingrained in the whole food culture from start to finish.
Yeah.
Just how important worldwide connections are.
And especially at the beginning, toilet paper was an issue, canned food was an issue. I wasn't able to get chickpeas to make my hummus for weeks. It's terrible.
A global crisis, Michelle. No, it is really interesting. Like, the whole panic buying thing was a bit crazy.
What was it like in Glasgow?
In Glasgow, I mean, like, it didn't seem as bad as some of the images that came out of places like London, but it was still pretty bad. I mean, it was big old queues everywhere, and I couldn't get flour either. I couldn't get lots of things, actually. There was no pasta anywhere for ages. But at the same time, one of the things that came out of this was where, especially the area of Glasgow I live in, there's quite a lot of world food shops and Asian food shops. And a large campaign started being like, you can get all these things in the world food shops. Just stop going to places like, you know, Tesco or wherever, and start
Yeah.
going to like your local shops instead.
Mm.
And so like there's a really nice butcher's around the corner from where I live, and every time I walk past there's a big old queue there, and there's like a greengrocers that, you know, is doing a really good job at, like, you know, having social distance markers everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I do think that like the whole big shop experience and people going once a week is definitely a real thing. But at the same time, I think this has maybe encouraged people to look beyond the supermarket and maybe towards more things in the local area, especially
Absolutely.
in terms of like buying things for other people, which I
Yeah.
think is, you know, another good thing that's sort of come out of this, is people offering to buy food for their neighbours, for their friends or whatever.
Yeah.
But also the other side to that is I was talking to my grandmother the other day, and she was saying about how she's a bit worried to ask the person who gets her shopping for her to get her certain things, because she doesn't want to be seen as like someone who eats so much chocolate and stuff like that, you know?
But is she getting someone to get her groceries?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's just that, you know, she didn't want to ask them to go out and get her special chocolate just from Marks and Spencer's or whatever.
Have you done any comfort food like during this crisis?
I'm very very blessed actually to have a lovely family, because the first week of the lockdown I was pretty ill, and when I was recovering, I happened to speak to my cousin in Yorkshire, and she sent me a care package filled with different instant noodles.
Oh,
And it saved my life, I still think, because like it was that comfort, that level of comfort that I needed at that time, and, you know, it
yes.
helped to charge my soul.
Yeah.
And, you know, once again, she probably wouldn't have done that any other time, because she'd be like, "Why don't you just go to the shop, Sean?"
What would you recommend for emerging artists to do during this
So I
period?
think one of the things that is missed the most about these sort of things is the community and the conversations that people were used to be able to have in, you know, the pubs or the cafes or the like events or wherever. Because I think oftentimes, you know, you go to those sort of things and there'd be someone complaining about, oh, you know, I'm so stressed about this application or whatever, and you feel like everyone's sort of in a similar boat to you.
Yeah.
Whereas now, when it's sort of you're more isolated, it can feel very much like it's just you and the application, and that's it.
Yeah.
Forever, you know. And so I think like being able to still talk to people is really important, and it's difficult because, you know, it can feel a bit weird to just sort of contact someone out of the blue and be like, can we talk about art and applications and all this stuff that ultimately, within the context of a global pandemic, doesn't matter. Like, you know, it doesn't matter compared to like people's health and people dying and everything, but it's important to us as like an artistic community. And so I think for our mental well-being and mental health, it's important to still stay connected if we can.
Yeah.
And so that could include things like just emailing people out of the blue. You know, if there's an artist you really like, now is a great time to sort of DM them on Twitter or send them an email or whatever, and just be like, I'm a big fan of you, or like, you know, I really liked your work or something like that. You know, just to show them a bit of appreciation, to keep that sense of community going. People will find that like, you know, the majority of artists are like decent people, maybe.
Yeah.
We
we like
people that like to talk about their art, so.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, you know, so some of the things I've been doing to do with that as well, I've been like, as I think I mentioned, like Instagram live gigs,
Yeah.
events on Facebook and stuff like that. Yeah, it's not the same, and it's a bit weird, and it can be a bit awkward, and, you know, teething problems as everyone sort of adapts still. But at the same time, through these things, I've been able to, you know, connect with artists all over the world, and that's a really positive thing that has made me feel less alone. And when you're isolated, you just need to feel less alone, don't you? So I'd highly recommend checking out some events. At the beginning, it seemed like there wasn't a lot, and now there seems to be way too many. Like, I can't do everything.
Yes.
I swear I've become busier than I was before. But yeah, it's just sort of like, whatever comes up, sometimes you don't feel like it, and that's fine too. There shouldn't be a pressure that you have to tune in every night to something, but there could be something that seems really interesting to you, specifically to do with like an art that you're interested in, or a theme that you're interested in working in.
Yeah.
Also stuff like online workshops, that can be another thing. So I was lucky enough to do an online workshop with the Scottish BAME Writers Network a few weeks ago, and that was a really positive experience because it was sort of 15 of us in a doing like a video workshop, all talking about food and all talking about like our experiences, and people who normally I would see a fair bit in real life but hadn't seen since lockdown. Suddenly they were on screen. I was like, oh yeah, you and you and you.
Yeah.
So it's good that people out there are still doing stuff, and if it's possible, I think people should definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah. You've just become an editor for an international magazine in Atlanta, is that right?
Yeah. So I've joined up with X Post magazine to be their poetry editor. Because they seem to be doing something really interesting in terms of like it was very international kind of team, looking for work from underrepresented voices, underrepresented genres, stuff that specifically works to sort of mix genres or media. And I think with everything being online at the moment, that's a really interesting time to be working in a position like that and to be asking people to make work like that. Because suddenly online has become our stage. It's it's where everything's made now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, and with that, I mean, I've seen a mix of things. Some online shows and programs have been subtitled or BSL interpreted. I mean, how have you found the accessibility of being online? And would you recommend that, artists who are emerging to start engaging now with accessibility?
Definitely. I mean, in a way, it's super positive because people who perhaps couldn't come to events before, or would find it, more difficult to attend events, are able to come to online events like quite easily. So not quite easily, but in different ways.
Yeah, in a different way, exactly.
So I've got a friend who's doesn't do well in closed spaces and doesn't do well around like big groups of people. But together we watched an online thing where there was 50, 60 people watching. Amazing. And so in a way it was like, this is better. Why aren't we doing this before?
Yeah.
Well, I've been like working hard to make sure that everything's captioned that I do if possible. Which in the live setting is a bit more difficult, or requires specific access on the part of the organizer.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just doing something online, there are tools out there which can help make captioning more easy for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it is up to us right now to kind of shape the industry and just say, well, everything is captioned now. This is best practice. So when we go back to the stage, or we go back to whatever space it is that we're performing in, it should be captioned, and venues should be captioning all performances. I mean, I simply don't understand why there aren't registers of BSL interpreters, or of, yes, we can provide captioning for your performance here, here's how we would do it. It just simply doesn't make sense.
And also, as like an artist,
yeah,
it's like some of the most interesting conversations I've had have been with BSL interpreters or captioners, just in terms of like, being able to really focus on your work and try and see it in a different way from the perspective of someone who's trying to understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's brilliant. It's so good. I mean, and I think what I thought was fantastic was in Scotland, obviously Nicola Sturgeon, she had BSL interpreter for every briefing. In England, we've not had that. And there's been an uproar, and that has had a really big effect and really raised awareness of actually everything should be made completely accessible for everyone.
I do think, from my experiences in both England and Scotland, I do think Scotland's like really ahead of the game on that. I think like even like, you know, I'm just doing scratch nights or whatever, and they'll have BSO interpreters available, or you know, they'll encourage you to find yours at least.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fantastic.
yeah.
That's, yeah, there's a whole thing happening in Scotland, isn't it? Like, you know, I don't know what's going on in England, but in Scotland, you guys seem to have your shit together.
I mean, don't know if I'd go that far, but you know, we've got different kinds of shit going on up here.
So yeah, just give us some insight into what you're about to perform.
Great. So yeah, it's a sort of adaptation of a few connected classical Chinese myths to do specifically with the Archer Yi and the Jade White Rabbit, and sort of the tale of immortality and the Jade Emperor, who is like the sort of equivalent of a god who is able to grant immortality to various living beings. And through all of this drama that happens that you'll hopefully find out about in a second, we come to the conclusion that the world's a bit strange and that food is good.
I love this message. I think that's fantastic and so appropriate for right now. So lovely talking to you as always. We'll catch you later.
See you later.
Now, you might not think it to look at me, but I'm a Jade Emperor, an immortal being, an idea of light and balance, an attempted personification of the Tao of the universe, and a failure as well. You see, for all of history, it's been my duty to give out to others my own power of longevity, bits of my own immortality, all ground together with a special mix of herbs and spices and minerals, all to form a single pill which can grant forever life to any other living thing. But it's a duty that I've consistently failed at. You see, this is the story of the last human that I gave my immortality pill to. It was this human called Yi. This will be Yi. Now, Yi was an archer from just outside the city. They did some great things through their fellow humans. For instance, back in the day, there were 10 suns, which made getting around really difficult for everyone. So Yi shot down 9 of them, leaving just the one, which made life much more bearable for everyone. So I looked down, saw this, thought, you would make a good choice for immortality. Went down, gave him the pill, said, you know what, Yi? You're a good egg. Once you're ready, just take the pill. Come join me. But then Yi said that they didn't want to take it. Yi said that they were in love with this other human, this human that we'll call Chang. This is Chang. And Yi didn't want to be immortal without Chang, so Chang and Yi, they had a chat together and decided to just keep the pill safe in their house for the time being until they were ready to decide what to do with it. And then a few months later, Yi went out hunting for food, and Chang was back home baking a cake, and suddenly this other human broke in through the front door. We won't even give this human a name. But this human held Chang at knife point, growled at them that I know that Yi was given an immortality pill. Give it to me. I want it for myself. But luckily, Chang was strong and Chang fought back. And in order to stop the intruder from taking it for themselves, in a moment of panic, Chang made that choice to spontaneously take the pill for themselves. And at that exact moment that Chang took it, the world suddenly started to look so different to them. The world started to suddenly look so much more, stupid. And I mean, it just is, isn't it? It's all just so stupid. All this fighting and arguing and shouting, and all for what? A chance of immortality? How stupid. So at that moment, Chang decided to do what any sane human who'd just been given immortality would do, and escape by jumping up to the moon to live a calm life away from all the stupidity. And when Yi came back home and found out that Chang had gone up to the moon, and they were just distraught, heartbroken, depressed, they refused to move for days, and even when they did, they decided to just make a vow to give up archery. You see, Yi came up with this plan. Every year, Yi thought, if I work hard to bake Chang's favourite breads and cakes, perhaps I can tempt Chang back down. Now, I have to admit, from where I was sitting up here in the heavens, well, it seemed like a decent plan, I thought. Except for the fact that it never worked. Chang never did come back down. And eventually Yi died. Still just as heartbroken as ever. So anyway, what I learned from all this Chang and Yi business was that I'm really bad at social interactions with humans. So I thought that it would be best to just ask for some assistance for the next time that I tried. And who better to ask, I thought, than an animal? I mean, animals probably know humans so much better than anything else on the planet. I mean, they all do live down there together all at once, after all. So I devised a super fun test to find out which animal best understands humans. I disguised myself as a starving beggar. Oh, you should have seen me. I lay in the field with a pot in front of me, and I asked 3 different animals for help with finding food. There was a monkey, a fox, and a rabbit. Now, I don't have a monkey, a fox, or a rabbit here with me right now, up here in my house. So there's just going to be these different spices. Monkey, fox, rabbit. Right. So anyway, the monkey nodded and went off, and a few minutes later, the monkey brought back to me some fruit. A nice apple. Thank you, I said. Then the fox smiled helpfully and went off, and a few minutes later brought back some meat. I put the meat in my bowl, said thank you so much. And then the rabbit came back, and all the rabbit had was tears. See, the rabbit saw me cooking and eating so heartily and felt so guilty. The rabbit couldn't help but shout out, I'm so sorry, Mr. Beggar, but only being small and only eating grass, I haven't been able to find you anything that a human would want to eat. And I mean, I was busy eating at this point, so, you know, I was kind of about to say, no bother at all, you know, it's fine, don't worry. But before I could, the rabbit jumped straight into the pot next to the meat. If you're still hungry, though, he shouted, then you can always eat me. And I mean, can you imagine that? Being willing to just sacrifice yourself. It's just all so stupid. And obviously I couldn't let the poor fella die, so I granted him immortality right on the spot. Said, I guess you'll have to do then. Sent the rabbit off to live with Chang on the moon. Even to this day on the moon, Chang and the rabbit keep each other company. Meanwhile, I've decided to just give up on this whole granting immortality thing. It's just too difficult to decide who should get it. The consequences are just way too unpredictable. I mean, even today, humans all around the world, they still remember that story of Archer Yi. Every year I still see them. They bake cakes and sweets for each other, just like Yi kept baking things for Chang. And all it does is remind me of my failures. I mean, does no one else think of me? But then, I do see it as well. How even though Yi could never tempt Chang back down, other humans still seem to enjoy sharing their food with each other. The other day, for instance, I saw one human give another a cake and they both smiled. The other night I witnessed a human sharing a pizza with another human on a table in their front garden. And sometimes when I do see these humans sharing their food like that, well, it does bring something like a smile to my face. So what do you think? Is it possible that even though I failed in my duties in some way, it was still all a success? Probably not. I mean, I'm just a stupid Jade Emperor. What do I know about anything? And you humans are all still such a mystery to me.